Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. My name is Scott Barker. I'll be hosting this one. So thanks for spending the next 45 minutes to an hour with us. And what we're talking about today is what it takes to create a successful coaching culture. This is part 2. So if you did miss part 1, make sure you check it out. It'll be up on our YouTube channel, so check it out. But very excited to have this conversation back again. With two of my favorite people, awesome guys, joined by Matt Belitsky, who is the head of customer success over at Chorus, as well as Kyle Bastian, who is the director of sales enablement over at Drift. Matt and Kyle, welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Thanks, Scott.
Excited to be chatting with you two again. And before I kind of hand the reins off, because I want to be as hands-off as possible because you guys are pros and we got a lot of meaty content to get through. But just really quickly, housekeeping items. This will be recorded. So if you do need to jump off or you want to share this out with a colleague that you think could get some value from it, we'll be sending this out at the end. Usually takes us about 24 hours, so don't panic if you don't get it right away. And then, of course, just like any Sales Hacker webinar, we want this to be engaging, right? So we want questions from you. So jump into the Q&A section, introduce yourself, name, role, title, and any relevant questions that you have, we're going to be answering throughout. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the reins over to Matt, and we'll get this rolling.
Thanks, Scott. All right, we're going to get started. Let's jump into what we covered last time and what you can expect from this time. So last time we talked about training versus coaching versus enablement, developing a coaching culture, like what does good look like and how do you get there? Getting your manager and executives and reps to buy in, and then common challenges to overcome. So effectively what we taught you was what a coaching culture looks like, but we didn't tell you how to do it. And so in this session, we hope to get real tactical, and we're going to talk about foundational principles of what you do when you're creating a culture, and also Kyle's going to get more in depth with what he does at Drift. So Kyle, why don't you give a little preview of what we're going to talk about specifically in this webinar?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, a great point, Matt. Like last time we did talk about this from a theoretical standpoint, but of course we got to make this real for folks. And so I plan to kind of talk through how we actually act on a coaching culture here at Drift. Some of the, so I'm going to show you an example of a current process that's underway for us right now, something that we're certifying our team on, and like how we've built that program, how we think about that program, and a remarkably simple 2-page document on how to kind of keep organized around these programs. And so I'm hoping that you guys can leave here, feeling like you've got what it takes to kind of go forth and start working towards, building that kind of culture where people are open to feedback, are asking for feedback, are striving for excellence, and are kind of like pursuing sales as in an effort to master the craft. And that's what I think a great coaching culture looks like.
Fantastic. So we're going to jump right in. First thing we want to kind of just define what best in class means. It's something that people talk like we're going to up level, we're going to do this and that. Let's define best in class. We think it means 2 things: program adoption and forming habits. So Kyle, why don't you tell us a little bit about each of these before we jump into the rest of the content?
Yeah, so one of the things we talked about last time was this idea that you can't think your way into a new way of acting. You have to act your way into a new way of thinking. And so you kind of have seen this where like a lot of one-on-ones and a lot of like sales training will be around like talking through things. And I've been a part of sales trainings where I've been kind of like, talked at or had things described for me. But the thing is, like, that's not actually going to have that's not going to create that coaching culture. It's not going to change behavior. I'm never going to be able to like think my way into behaving differently, when it really matters when I'm on the phone with a customer. So one of the key aspects of a coaching culture that's best in class is like a very structured way of acting against the training. Like, what are we actually going to do And how do we know, one, the quantity of us doing this, and then the quality of us doing this? So I'm going to give you some real examples of this when I show you kind of what my program looks like. But it's like, how are we backing up the training and the coaching with actual actions that we can measure as it pertains like a live sales call? Because the truth is, you're never going to form these habits unless you simply do them. And it's also true that they're not going to feel natural at first. And that's the nature of any true habit. The first day you go to the gym in a long, and then once you start to see changes, then it becomes easier. And it's the same thing with people's sales calls. It's certainly with their paychecks. And so that aspect of habit forming is certainly very important. And then program adoption is, this is kind of another follow on to an idea that we talked about last week, and that Matt, when we start talking war stories later today, we'll get into some of this. But a lot of programs like sales training processes and methods are kind of come out with these like big reveals, which I don't advocate. I think it's important to kind of like create this with the reps, and that aspect of program adoption means that like there is no objectively best sales methodology or sales process, in my opinion. I think the best sales methodology and the best sales process is one that serves the needs of your buyers, whatever that is, and that your reps feel like it works. Like they've got to believe that this is helpful, or no matter whether it's like theoretically awesome or not, doesn't matter if people don't feel like it's going to help them be effective. And so those two things are critical aspects of a best-in-class coaching culture.
Cool. We're going to jump into a little bit of certification. And I want Kyle to talk about it in a second. Just wanted to give a quick reminder to everyone. If you have comments, definitely ask them in the Q&A section, and try to avoid using the chat unless you have a technical issue. Just wanted to give a quick reminder of that. Okay, so let's keep going. And Kyle actually taught this to me. He taught me that coaching culture requires this rigor of certification. And inherently, although we knew this was the case, he was able to really define a process. And so, Kyle, just like you did it with me, I'd love for you to walk us through the process.
Yeah, so I think like when I hear the phrase certification, I recoil a little bit, honestly, and I don't, it doesn't sound fun or like sexy or anything. So I think it's important to understand like why you need to do this. And I truthfully feel that like a lot of software out there and tools that are built to help you certify skills are severely missing the mark on that. And this really important reason. A lot of people consider certification to happen. You're certifying that they've completed the training, and this happens a lot with field reps, and this happens a lot in LMS systems where you can earn badges and things like that from doing the training, and in some cases even submitting the pitches. And and I don't think that's where certification happens. Like for me, certification has to happen when we can verify that you're able to use this in customer-facing situations effectively. And that's how we've defined certification at Drift. And we have a method for figuring out what that is that I'll share with you guys. But if you can't do it with a customer, it doesn't matter. You don't have it, and that's the bottom line. And so the reason it's important to go through this idea of certifying is that if reps are struggling, we want to help you as managers, as trainers. Like we want you to be effective, and we want you to make more money, and we want you to do a good job. But if I don't like whether you're certified or not, like when it comes to diagnosing where we can help, we often misdiagnose things as training or behavioral issues. So for example, as it relates to certification, like there needs to be a place where I can go, where the frontline manager can go, the director of sales, the VP of sales can go, and we can see whether like what do you know? Like not what you've been trained on, but what do you actually know? What skills you possess that you've been able to demonstrate in customer facing calls? Because then if you're struggling, I can identify skill gaps and we can train on that. If we're struggling and there aren't skill gaps, then this isn't what you're doing. It's like more how you're being, you know what I mean? It's like a behavioral issue. It's kind of like showing up late for work at that point. It's not that you don't know how to do this. You're just deciding not to, and you're not, singing on the same song sheet as everyone else. And it's not working, obviously, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. So that's why you got to certify people, because you have to know whether this is like a training issue or a behavioral issue when it comes to how do we help you best.
Okay, that's
All right.
solid. We got that. So now we know that there's a difference between having the skill and having the skill and not using it.
Sure. Yep. All right. So how do we build a skill? Or I think, and actually, what skills to build? Now, I see this in like the analogy you guys might be familiar with is like if you guys do quarterly business reviews or monthly business reviews with your reps, or as a rep, if you're on the line and you do that with your boss, they all go in there and there's a slide that's like what worked this last period, what didn't work this last period, and what I'm going to go differently this next period. And if you sit in those over time, you see like sometimes there's very little connection from month to month to month. And it's kind of like a reactionary response to like what happened this last month. And when I hear a rep say like, I'm going to be better at this, or I'm going to focus on this, I often don't know exactly what they're talking about, you know? And so when it comes to certification, the first thing you need to be thinking about is like, why are we certifying on this? And what is this? And what are we actually doing? So you don't need to like, and the biggest mistake people make, Matt, you and I talked about this, is a lot of people come in as trainers and they want to just teach everybody to sell the way they sold, you know, or they have whatever system worked for them at their last company and they're just going to kind of install that playbook at their new company. And I think we got to resist the urge to do that. What we should prioritize when it comes to our certification is just like looking at our business's numbers. And like looking at like whether it's an ABM play or inbound or whatever you're doing, like where are we, like what metric, like what thing, if we were better at, would give us like the most lift, like which lever has the most leverage, and start there. And then use the information that we have to diagnose like where are we missing and why is that number the number that it is. And so you start with like, what would drive the biggest business improvement? And that's identifying the problem, right? And then you go to like determining the desired state, which is doing a sensitivity analysis. Like, okay, so let's say we were able to, you know, increase our pipeline generation by 20%, all our other numbers held. What would that look like, right? Or what if you're able to improve our close rate by just 10%? And what would that look like? And that's how you kind of size those levers. And then you say, okay, well, this is obviously the biggest one. This is where we have the opportunity to make the biggest improvement. Benchmarking here is super important as well. So you kind of understand where you should and shouldn't be, or where you are or not doing well. And it's not arbitrary. It's like measured against, you know, your peer group. And then you kind of determine like, okay, so if we're able to achieve that, what would that look like? And that is what the business outcome is. And so the desired state is my reps can't do this now. I'm going to train them to do this. I'm going to certify that they're able to do that in customer-facing situations. And this is the business outcome that it's going to drive. And that business outcome isn't going to show up for 60 to 90 days or whatever. So here are the KPIs I'm going to track in the meantime to see if we're on track and like have a chance of achieving this business outcome. So when it comes to like prioritizing your certification, you might build, like I currently have 3 programs teed up. I'm doing one right now, but when we're done, I already know if nothing else changes what the next one's going to be and the ones after that, right? And so it's a matter of focus and prioritization and driving towards business outcomes. This works when it comes to building a certification program. It also works if you're a rep or a manager who has to regularly go in front of your leadership team or the board or whatever and talk about what you're going to be doing differently next month. You have to have this level of rigor around that in order for it to be effective.
It's great.
That's
so
awesome.
just to recap quickly, and then let's go to some questions maybe.
Yeah.
Scott. So just to be clear, so Kyle, what you're saying is that for identify the problem, the goal is to actually like hypothesize what could be going wrong, then identify a metric, and then potentially the baseline of that metric is where you're going to improve from.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, and this might sound obvious, right? As I'm saying it, like it might seem pretty obvious, but like I have made the mistake before of just like, look, I know we have to do really good discovery, you know? And so, and I listen to some calls, like I don't think we're doing good discovery based on my opinion and I'm the expert. And so I'm going to train everybody on doing discovery. And then I go and tell the boss, like, we're going to do discovery. And they're like, well, why are we doing it? Like, why aren't we doing like this? Or why aren't we doing that? And what's going to happen? And like, what's the results going to be? And when are you going to get that result? And I'm like, just trust me, discovery sucks. It's got to be better, right? Like that's no way to build kind of a best-in-class culture. And just from my experience of having made that mistake and just being called on it.
This is something that Kyle and I talked about in the last webinar where we are totally aligned. If you go ahead and start to improve things and all you're able to show at the end is qualitative feedback, and it's not quantitative, then it's not successful because you weren't able to drive the needle or move the needle. So this is what he's talking about, building that out. Then the next step here, we have determine desired outcome. So he mentioned sensitivity analysis. If you were able to impact the metric by X amount, what would it look like? What does the future look like? And then finally, what he mentioned, what's the business outcome? What does it look like in the end? And how do you know that everyone's adopted it? How do you know that it's successful? Not just so that you can end the experiment and the initiative, but so you can start the next one.
Yeah, this is awesome. And I love this topic. The amount of engagement and questions we get right off the get-go is amazing. So this is obviously top of mind for a lot of people. So thank you everyone for the questions. So yeah, Matt and Kyle, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in with a few of them here.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. All right. So I really like this question. So what kind of recommendation can you make to a sales manager who has a different sales strategy and wants to implement that, even though there aren't any issues with the current pipeline? And then in brackets, resisting change on reinventing the wheel is the issue that Michael's going through right now. Kyle, do you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's and this is a great question, right? Because this happens all the time, and I think it's like if you're going to be credible and you're going to like make the case for change, it's like you have to, like, this is what you have to do, is just like run this program, right? So if I'm going to say like, look, I want to redo how we do our sales process, and all sort of stuff, then I've got to have a pretty good problem identified. It's like, why we need to go through all that? Because my experience with like process and sales methodology redesigns and implementations is that they always disappoint. It's kind of like reorganizations that way, where like we had this idea and that we map it out and it looks like a beautiful mind on paper, and then when like, it's like Tyson used to say, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, and then you like go to like implement it and the results are slower to come than we thought. People don't change behavior as fast as we thought. Old habits die hard. And we thought way more about our process and our methodology than we did how we're actually going to reinforce it and install it, and change the habit and the behavior amongst the reps. And so my experience with those things is that they don't work extremely well. So my honest advice is like, I would caution against doing wholesale process redesigns. I would rather like do that incrementally over a period of time by thinking about like, what's one thing that we can improve that would make the biggest impact in the organization, and then do that. And like, you can kind of shift into a new process and methodology over a period of time, but like rip and replace when it comes to that kind of stuff is very dicey.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great advice, and would definitely second that. Like, you have to break up the whole into small bite-sized chunks and do it versus a problem versus just, let's change everything for the sake of changing everything. Matt, any further?
Yeah, I have a bit of a slightly of a different take on this. So the way I interpreted the question is, there's a sales methodology, there's a sales manager that has a different methodology, and to take what they said and kind of give you an even more tactical answer or approach, mm-hmm. I would break everything down into small chunks like they're talking about, but then take one of the small chunks and experiment in an A/B test against what the sales manager is saying. If they're so strong that they are willing to go against you to make it known that they have a bigger case, then by all means, go for it, test it, try it, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it's proven not to be working, and then you can move forward with the rest of the chunks you need to handle.
Yeah. Again, great advice. I like it. Makes total sense. You kind of need to have that comparison, right? That benchmark, or else you're just, throwing mud at the wall.
And just make sure the benchmark is measurable and not qualitative feedback.
Absolutely.
We were hoping to switch gears a little bit here, and Kyle was going to share his screen.
All right, we're doing that. Let's do it.
Yeah, to walk you through you talk about it, Kyle.
Yeah, so you guys, I don't know if you saw, we released a book this last week called Conversational Marketing.
No one's on.
I don't. Maybe you guys heard. And in the process of that, we've been kind of like updating our definition. We've been talking about conversational marketing as this like category that we started to coin a few years ago. And the way we talk about it and our definitions around it, and frankly, as our products evolve, the amount of use cases that you can now, like the amount of places you can like start conversations with clients has expanded. So the point is we're updating our kind of how we talk about conversational marketing with our clients. This isn't to plug Drift. This is just because like, you know, this change in our definition around it has required a certification. And so that's the program that I'm currently working on. So I'm just teeing up what you're about to see here. So here we go. Okay. Is it working on? You guys see the screen here? Okay. So this is the high-tech, super complicated way that I built and sell certification programs into people at Drift. I'm kidding. It's a Word document and it's 2 pages. So the whole thing starts with like, it's kind of like we talked about. This is literally the actual document that I shared with my VP of sales and our CRO when it came to building this in. There was a separate document that we used to determine that conversational marketing was the thing that we should be working on. But basically, it starts by just saying like when a rep is certified on whatever it is, in this case, it has to be conversational marketing. What does that mean they can do, right? Like, what are the things and the use cases for that that would signify that they've got it? We have to answer the question of how do we know that they got it? And so, like, what is the artifact? And like the kind of for most things, like the content for most things we certify, we use this framework, which is like, have they learned the information? Can they show me that they can perform it in like a role play or demo or like a trial situation? And then are they fluent, which means like, can they do it with customers? And so each of these has to have like an artifact that proves it. So the first might be like a test, you know, some sort of which is like the most boring thing, but like we need to make sure that people like have the information and can like speak the language. The second might be like a video or a pitch of them doing a competent role play. And then lastly is using your conversational intelligence platform to hear them actually perform it really well with a customer. And so that's how it, like when I have all these 3 things and I have them bundled together and I can look at them and I can share them with anybody who wants to say, hey, does this person know that? That's when I consider them to be certified. And so these are like real things that can be pointed to as like how we knew that they had it. All right. So the next question is now the reinforcement. So like up till this point is mostly training, right? Now we're talking about the real work of coaching. And so it's like, how do we know that they're using it? And so we take like our conversational intelligence software and build a tracker. What I'm actually, like, it's not just, there's a lot more to it on the back end there, but it's basically like, what are, you know, like how can I very quickly go through 100 sales calls and find the actual moment that we're currently reinforcing? Because I frankly, honestly never listened to or very rarely listen to entire sales calls end to end. Usually when I'm reinforcing training, I find exactly the moment that's on the heels of what we've been working on and just focus to that. And so like, I'm not going to score or listen to 3 of your calls all together. I'm listening to that moment in 3 of your calls. The 3 calls that happen immediately after the training. So there's immediate reinforcement to what they've been taught in a training setting and seeing how they're adopting it. And there's immediate feedback so that they can start doing it on their next call. There's no lag between them receiving the information and showing that they can practice it well with us reinforcing how they're doing it in a customer facing situation. So that's how we're going to know they're using it. Like we can actually track the percentage of calls. I know what the baseline is right now. I have a chart and I know what my goal is for that. And that's how I'm going to know that the training is being adopted prior to the business outcome, which is, improving conversion rate. And that's what we think will be the business outcome of having, better conversations around conversational marketing. That's what our KPIs are. We have expected return dates. And then lastly are like the milestones. And like, this is, it couldn't be simpler than this, but like week 1 is about the information, conveying the information, like telling them why we're doing what we're doing and showing them what good looks like. Week 2 is around practicing it and, submitting vidyards and doing closer dome exercises and kind of getting the practice reps in. And then, week 3 is game time, and now you've got calls and we're going to hear how you're doing on the call. And so within 3 weeks, I think we can take just about any anything, even of like pretty high complexity, and build a certification around that. And then we set a goal for how many people we think will be able to become certified within 3 weeks. And by the way, 15 to 20% of your workforce or sales team is going to just resist this altogether. Right? And it won't be the same 15% every time. Some people, just certain topics just aren't going to, is going to be harder for them to get with, or they're just going to fundamentally disagree with how you're doing it. So be prepared for that. And you should build in time for the fact that people learn at different rates. And some people are going to get stuff right away. And some people are going to take a little bit more practice. And those things are different from person to person.
Kyle, before you keep going, so I just want to reiterate that the format of what you put in front of other people, it's more important that the content of what you're planning on doing is there. It doesn't need to be in a fancy format. It doesn't need to be difficult or very fancy or designed in any way. You can see that this is a living document that Kyle's using right now. In the program details right now, he has like a box that conveys what he needs to say, and he's able to go and check in with various stakeholders, and they can immediately understand what's going on. So a question I have for the room, and I'm hoping other people can speak to this, is have people felt like they haven't been able to start a coaching program because they've been lost in the format of how they've tried to convey it? Or are they stuck because they didn't know that this is a template that is effective, and therefore they can use this as inspiration to move forward? So as the questions come in, I'd love to hear more about what's going on. And Kyle, please keep going with breaking down the weeks.
No, that's it. And so and this is really helpful because I'll get questions like, hey, where are we at on that certification program? And I'll just send them a screenshot of this little chart. And it's just we're in the middle of week 2. And you're like, cool, got it. And if you want to see our test results, I can show them to you, and if you want to, see their pitches, we can share that with you as well. And then I'll let you know how everyone's certified at the end. It's VP level people. It's we'd rather spend our time and our energy on the content of the training. And I'm not going to show you guys all that, but how do we structure the training, and how do we tell a story? How do we make it so that people are into it? How do we craft the experiences of the training and all that stuff? And we put a lot of time in lesson design, and how do we, be thoughtful around making this engaging? How do we build exercises within this? How do we make this I want people to be oh, fuck yeah, training today, excuse my language. But it's people get really excited to come to training, right? It shouldn't be oh man, training today. They should be training is super fun and all that kind of stuff. And so that's how we want to, so I don't really people just need to get the point through stuff like this. So it doesn't need to be overly designed, in my opinion. I think you're better off focusing on, on the rep facing content and designing those experiences. And then if anyone wants any further detail, the last of it is just what those actual, it's just kind of bullet points of what those lesson plans actually look like. And it probably means a lot more to me than it does to the folks in this webinar. But that's it. I
think it's good. This is great. We're already getting some people coming in saying these are some things they haven't thought of before. That's definitely adding more meat to what they've been doing. So that's good. Why don't you stop sharing, and I'll go back to the deck.
And I'm going to quickly sneak in a question from the community again, because I think it's very relevant. So how often are you going through these certification processes? And I think it's a great question, because I think a lot of organizations fall into this trap of one and done, and my reps are certified and now we're good to go. How often are you going through this process with your team?
Perpetually.
Yeah.
100% of the time. We don't run, I never run trainings at the end of a period. We have, a lot of our reps are on monthly cycles right now. And so I don't take them off the floor at the end of the month. And I would advocate the same if you run a quarterly cycle. So we don't do that. And that's part of the reason it's 3 weeks, but it tends to work. But yeah, it's basically okay, what's next? You know what I mean? It's I think there's always room to improve. There's always stuff that we can be better at. And so it's that, we call it an engine, that's our certification engine. And then it's just a matter of what actual thing are we working on right now? And we never are not doing that.
Yeah. I love it.
And Matt, you say, Kyle, I was going to ask Kyle, so you think it's monthly, how many of these, are you running each month? Is it once a month? So you do 12 a year? What's the cadence?
Yeah, so we usually do like we'll pick like one big thing per month, like one like what we call like pillar piece that we're trying to train folks on. And then there's occasional things that happen around that. You know what I mean? So like we might not do an entire 3-week certification around like a new marketable moment from the product team. But we will do some training and lightweight certification around that. There's other instances where there's on like more update sort of trainings rather than like full, like I would think of certification around skill building rather than like knowledge dissemination. You know, so if I'm like literally trying to like build a skill that you'll be able to use here, but then also use elsewhere, like the conversational marketing one we do, like a big part of that training is not just like it's like how to craft a compelling pitch and like what the components of that are and like what the framework is, and then how this thing we're talking about slots into that. So they leave with like a great way to talk about what Drip does, but they also leave with like, if you were to talk about anything to anybody and you really wanted to make a compelling point, here's a great way to think about structuring the information contained therein so you can do that. And that's a skill they learn there that they can then, you know, use elsewhere.
That's great. All right, I'm going to share this. Are there any other questions, Scott, that have been coming in?
There's quite a few, but let's keep it rolling, and we'll answer some more at the end.
Okay, so just to summarize what Kyle was talking about, summarizing the framework in general, how we'll know that they got it, learned, perform, fluent. Why don't you give it a 30-second overview again, Kyle? Keep us in the loop here.
Yes. Yeah, totally. So think about it this way. It's like learned is, do they have the information? Performed is like a role play. Like can they do, does it look good in practice? And then fluent is, does it look good on the field?
All right. Okay. So we're going to move forward. We're at like the halfway mark, which is fantastic because that was like half of the goal was to go through that content, show you what Kyle's doing. I know some of you had questions about, can you get your hands on the actual template? The answer is yes. We're going to kind of create a version of it that's shareable and you can have access to it, no problem.
Totally.
No problem with that. But what we want to do is jump into some war stories. So what might make sense, Scott, is if we just do a couple of questions, get them out of the way now, and then we can jump into some common war stories that Kyle and I have experienced in the front lines.
Perfect. Sounds good. And getting a call from my hotel room now and down at SASTA right now. So
it's great. Live, action-packed.
Action-packed. Things are happening. All right. So we have some great questions. I'm just going to ignore that phone call. Okay. Let's go with this one. So this is a very specific question. So say we determined we'd move the needle most if we could enable reps to schedule more demos. My question is, how are you then determining how to develop the coaching for the reps to do this? Are you looking at top producers, listening to their calls, coaching to their script? What should our go-tos be other than just to train them what we think works, our style?
Yeah, sure. So I think like we've been going through this, and I mentioned there's like 3 things that I've got queued up. One of them is scheduling more demos that after we do the one we're working on is what we're going to do. So I recently went through this. It's going to be different for your business. I'll share with you how I did it and the way we looked at it. But like we looked at the way I thought about it was from a persona standpoint. And so I thought like, we thought there's kind of three buyers that we think about when we're building our product, 3 kind of buyer personas that we think we can convey a bunch of value to, and that will be really into what we're doing. And then I looked at like the role of the primary contact of all the pipeline we had created over the last 3 months. And it turned out that we had like a really outsized level of pipeline coming from one persona in particular, and that the other 2, which derive a ton of value from what we do, were not really represented in the generation of that pipeline. So we then looked at like and then exactly what you said, we looked at like what the best reps were doing, and it's like what plays are we actually running, and kind of just like categorize them, like what's the general, like is this like a social proof play? Is this like, hey, you've got this problem, like a solution sell play? Like what what was the kind of nature of the play? We call it the value thesis. Like, what was the value thesis that we reached out to you on that resonated? And what it turned out was we had two really good plays that the majority of our pipeline came from that were all aimed at the same persona. So the exercise is then it's like, okay, so what structurally was it about those plays that worked? Like why was that play effective? And then how can I kind of craft a similar play to a different persona? And we're going to talk about our product completely differently in that case. But how do we kind of take structurally what worked for these folks and develop 3 or 4 potential ways that that pitch might work for somebody else, and then just test them, you know what I mean? And so try to think about it. That's how we thought about that. We took kind of a persona based approach and realized that, we were only really talking to one type of buyer, and there's 2 others that I think we could do really well with.
Yeah. I love that. Makes total sense. And Matt, anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, I'll just say, I know that Jamie asked that question. We're trying to keep the content high level enough that it's relevant to everyone, but also specific so that you can operationalize the coaching culture, coaching program. Mm-hmm. But if you have specific questions about metrics that you're doing in your organization that you want to track or how to set this up, just because the webinar ends doesn't mean we're going anywhere. We're still on LinkedIn, by email, etc. I mean, find us, ask us. We're here to help and be a resource to you.
Love it.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
There are a few. Yeah, let's tackle this one.
Sounds
more.
Good.
This goes down kind of what we were talking about before about how often. Again, it's a specific question. So we do trainings on a different subject each week, and the trainings fall into one of 3 buckets: tech and efficiency, product, and then process. Do you think that weekly is too frequent? Is the question.
Yeah. So I think it depends on a couple of things. I'm going to just give me an answer. I think it is. And here's the thing. I don't think it's too frequent to do trainings with people. I think it's too diverse of a topic set for people to absorb that information, or at least that's been my experience. The rate limiting thing about training is not how often you can prepare content that's good, or how willing you are to take your reps off the floor to do training. It's really how fast can people actually understand something to the level that they can do it and feel comfortable doing it in a customer facing situation. So the times in my career where I've tried to I came into my last company and I was I looked around, I was oh man, we got a lot of work to do. I can think of 5 things that we need training on right now, and I can't wait to get in here and do that. And then, it's I did different topics, like you said, weekly. And then I looked back a month later, and the thing I trained them on 3 weeks ago was not being done. And then your kind of training has this kind of flavor of the week feel to it, where you can actually give the reps the idea that you don't know what you're doing, and there isn't consistency from week to week. And so the rep experience can sometimes be wait, I thought you said focus on this, and now it's focus on this, and now it's focus on this. What the hell do you want me to do? And they just kind of revert to their old habits. So right. So the thing that you got to be mindful of is you got to, I mean, if your reps can keep up with it, and maybe you have a smaller team and they're able to get it and they sit close and they learn really fast from each other, then you might be able to go faster. But I think it's really important to check that people are using it well before you start introducing more topics.
Yeah, I think that's fair for sure. I think the retention piece, you can only throw so much at people and expect them to retain it. And Matt, what is your take on that?
Yeah, I think this parlays well into the next area that we're planning on going into, which is war stories. So,
yeah,
Kyle, Kyle and I both speak about this topic with confidence because we've been on the front lines and done it. But in order for us to be successful, we've had to fail quite a few times. And I know you'll enjoy hearing what we have to share, because I'm sure some of you are either have had the same experience or might have the same experience, and you just want to know that you're on the same page. So let's jump into that. We bucketed our stories into 3 themes. The first one is more training, sweet, said no rep ever. The second is don't boil the ocean, aka avoid the big reveal, which we'll get into. And the third is Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes time. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kyle to go through theme number 1. I know we've talked about some stories, but let that inspire you, let it soak in, and then give the audience something they want.
Yeah. So, God, what was it? So so theme 1, more training suite, said no one ever. This is like, there's kind of 2 stories that come to mind. And this has happened at a couple companies that I've entered, where you have just reps at very different levels, and so there's a group of folks that that are just like brand new or recently promoted from the BDR ranks, and they just can't wait for you to tell them what to do, and they love training. But then there's also people that have like had a degree of success there and have like been hitting quotas and are kind of the top dogs, and like, look, no one's perfect, and as a trainer I've got an eye for that, right? And so like I'll listen to their calls and I'll hear like things they're missing and probably like deals that are slipping and stuff like that. But they're kind of like, thanks, man, whoever you are and whatever you've done. I actually don't care, but I've been doing pretty good here, and kick rocks pretty much. And so like, and so here's like, so a lot of that, like, and I've talked to other like new trainers that are like, man, there's like a group of people that just aren't drinking the Kool-Aid, and like I think that's a pretty common experience when you show up into an organization. And so like the specific experience was like people who were just like, I don't like, they don't participate, they don't want to be in the training, they don't think that you have anything valuable to offer them. And I've had that exact experience happen to me. And so the way that I would approach that is to like, you don't, it sounds weird, but like, just don't train them. Don't do anything with them at the outset, like find the group that's willing and work with them. And if you're, once they start to see better results, and like they'll start saying things in the phone, and like the veterans turn their head and be like, where'd you get that? That was awesome. And like, then they start seeing results. They sound great. They're getting big wins, and people are like, the shine is kind of coming off them and going towards the new guys, then they start being like, so, hey, can you share that deck with me? Or like, what, can we get that too? Right. And so then you can kind of like, break away in that way, but you don't have to mandate change for everybody all at once, I think is the important thing there.
Something I'll add to this is something that Kyle and I were talking about. So I'm stealing his words here, but he said to me, people say they want feedback, but they want validation. And I think that there are 3 camps of people that you could consider training or putting into a coaching program. In my experience, there's the people, like he mentioned, that crave feedback. These are BDRs. These are people who have seen what a coaching culture can do for them. There are the people who say they want feedback and they're open and receptive to feedback, but really they just want to be told that what they're doing is right. And then there's another camp, which is people who don't care about training because they think what they're doing is right and they don't want anyone to tell them differently.
Totally.
And so when you're developing your coaching program, you have to think to yourself, like, how many calories do you really want to exhaust on making sure that every single person across those 3 camps gets the content? Maybe it makes sense to just focus on the people that are the most receptive to feedback, and the people that you can convince are getting feedback through validation. And then maybe that's 2/3, maybe that's more of your team. And you don't even have to worry about it, because you'll never win everyone over. But as long as you get the majority, you're in a great place.
Yeah, that's a great point. I definitely I'm always kind of, I don't want to say wary, but like reps will often send me calls and be like, hey, Kyle, I'd love to get your feedback on this call. And I've got to ask them like, what specifically are you looking for feedback on? And sometimes it's like sometimes it's like their absolute best call ever, and they want me to tell them that they're perfect and don't need to work on anything. Sometimes it's like an earnest attempt to get better, which I love. And then sometimes it's like a deal that they lost and they couldn't handle an objection, and they just want validation that there was like nothing they could have done differently. And then like you tell them like, no, you actually messed that up a while back, and whatever. And it's like, they don't, and then the way that's received, you realize like that, oh, that wasn't why you're asking me. My bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense. Cool. So we're going to move to the second theme, which I think resonates well. I'll just talk about this for 2 seconds before Kyle jumps in. Something that I have mentioned to Kyle before, something I mentioned to everyone I speak to, work life, personal life, etc. Don't boil the ocean. I use this one all the time. So there are so many people who take on too much when they're developing a coaching culture or a program. They think that by having the first training, that means the coaching program has been delivered. They think that by having had the training or the initial training and then having some of the reps adopting it, the content, but not all of them, that they've completed it and that's done. You need to get really clear on what your expectations are. Then, as we mentioned before, break them down into bite-sized chunks. This could be week or 2-week intervals. And then as you go, you'll know that you're making progress and you're getting towards having a fully adopted coaching culture, but it doesn't mean you have to do it in a week, and it won't happen in a week. That's my context for Don't Boil the Ocean, but now Kyle's going to tell you a little bit more about avoiding the big reveal.
Yeah, for sure. So this is, I've seen like the most spectacular fails I've witnessed in training and coaching culture attempts are to the viewer's question earlier around like wholesale redos of a sales process and methodology, right? And I kind of think like if you ever find yourself like I've been on both sides of this. If you ever find yourself like in a room with a small group of people architecting an elaborate process, from scratch that you then intend to roll out wholesale, even if you have an airtight reinforcement methodology, I would resist the urge to do that. I haven't ever seen that go extremely well. I've definitely seen it go extremely poorly. I think you got to be very, very careful when it comes to like complete, like I guess what I would say is like, if you're going to, like, if you feel like you find yourself in a place where it's like, man, we're doing everything wrong. Like we do need to like rebuild this stuff. I would still encourage you to think about like, what are the places that like, what's the number one place to like, if you were to just change one thing and it would have the most impact, what would that be? And think about that and how you're going to influence that first. And you can kind of find yourself at in an entirely new place over a period of time. But caution against the process methodology rip and replace.
Something else I'll mention about conversation intelligence as a whole, when we see our customers trying to implement their coaching programs, they don't realize that listening to the equivalent of 15 meetings takes time. There's this thought that like, oh, I'll have time later today to do it. And it's like, it takes time to go through and listen. You can even listen at like 2x the speed, that's fine. But you still need to be listening, to be cognizant of what's going on. And so what we do is we advise them to break them down into bite-sized chunks. Let's do 3 calls a day, block off an hour. Probably doesn't take an hour, but why not block off an hour just so you have buffer? And then over the course of 5 days, you listen to 15 calls. You didn't boil the ocean. You did what you had to do. You know more than you did on Monday, and you're ready to make some decisions going forward. So there you go. Very tactical advice.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Another thing to mention about Don't Boil the Ocean, maybe it falls into this Rome wasn't built in a day theme, is leverage other resources. Leverage other people in your organization to help you. Just because you are implementing this coaching program doesn't mean that you need to do it alone. I'm sure there's a sales ops person, or there's a person who's a sales manager or a sales rep who's like really into getting feedback. Empower those people to help you, to help drive your message, to help empower change, make this happen. I'm sure, Kyle, there's been instances where you've seen this happen, right?
Yeah, yes, definitely. I try to be like, one of my favorite things to say is like, look, I'm just one guy talking, and like, I try not to assert anything, and kind of just be like, this is either like what the data tells me, or like, this is what our role models are telling us, or this is what the benchmark is. And, I don't know, I wish the world were different, but this is what it is. And we need to do something about it, And so it's like, I think of myself more as like a facilitator of change rather than like the person who gets to say what great is, you know what I mean? Like, if that answers your question, like that's not, but yeah, I think it's very important to like always be like pointing or looking for, like inspiration all over the place. Yeah, 100%.
One more thing I'll add to that is, and this is just another way to look at things, just like when you go on a diet and you tell people you're on a diet, I don't know if everyone on that's attending has been on a diet before, but I'm sure you've been privy to this. When you go on a diet and you tell someone you're on a diet, they have opinions about your diet. They have opinions about what you should be doing, how you should be doing it, what you could be doing better. Well, when you start to solicit feedback from either thought leaders or your peers or your colleagues about implementing this coaching program, you will inevitably receive the same volume of feedback of how you should be doing it. So I would just advise you to just discern the type of feedback you're getting, have a definitive plan of what you're going to do, and then solicit the feedback, but don't let it sway you too much, because you are your own person. Just get it done the first time. And if you need to iterate, you can. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. And you don't have to listen to everyone else to tell you what to do. You probably got version 1 correct already.
Totally. At Drift, we say feedback, not consensus. So I can ask you what you think, but I don't have to listen, There
you go. It's another one I'm going to take from Kyle. Feedback, not consensus. Done. All right, let's move to the third one. This is Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes time. Kyle, has there ever been an instance as an enablement professional where you've maybe overcommitted something to be done, and then you realize wow, this is going to take a lot longer, and then you had to go backtrack?
Oh yeah. Like the first time literally the first time I came to Drift and, kind of picked the first thing that we wanted to reinforce. And I was working with you, Matt, and we put together kind of a way of scoring for that thing and listening in conversational intelligence to see if it works or not. And I set far overly aggressive, I thought conservative at the time, goals around how much coaching and reinforcement myself and our sales managers and directors were going to be able to give to our team. And so I was like, look, we're gonna score 20% of our demos, which would have meant an extra 15 hours a week of work for each of our managers every single week. They're just sitting around waiting for me to assign more management responsibilities to them, And so it just didn't happen. I famously underestimated the amount of time it would take for manager trainer alignment in reinforcing what we were doing on a training side. And so that was one really good example of how I just tried to, I came up with this idea that I thought was super important, and it was, and it did work eventually, but I just was way overly optimistic around how fast we'd be able to implement something like that.
Another way to look at this is we have another customer, and I've seen this many times, so I'll just speak generally. They were tracking conversion rate improvements week over week, and trying to improve it monthly. And they said, I feel like a failure because week over week, instead of it going from, let's just for example purposes say, instead of going from 5 to 6, it's going from 5.2 to 5.4 to 5.6 to 6. And my recommendation is show those decimal points. It's still progress. You're still making it happen. You're moving mountains to adopt this coaching program, to change behaviors and form habits. Celebrate the fact that it's going up. If it's going down, that's okay too. At least you can still make improvements, and you should give yourself time, because these things take time. So I would just, treat yourself as an outsider looking in to this. What does it really mean? Are you making change? Yes. Are you learning even better? And that's my advice for anyone setting up a coaching program.
Love it. And we're getting some great feedback, gentlemen. So people are loving this conversation. People are saying this is legit. This is awesome. So definitely a conversation that needs to continue. And if you don't mind, I think I'm going to jump in with a few more questions for you guys.
Let's do it.
As we kind of wrap up. We got 5 minutes. So this is a great question, and I think one that can be very difficult for smaller organizations. So this is when you're part of a smaller organization and you don't have an ops or an enablement role, who should own this coaching culture, in your opinions? And Kyle, let's start with you.
Sure. So everybody is the cop-out answer, but also the truth, right? And the thing is, Peer coaching is a big thing. And some of like the things that I've been most proud of is when we'll do some coaching and some reinforcement, and then I'll see like reps like iterating on it, and it like becomes different. You know what I mean? And it like takes on a life of their own because they're having conversations around it and trying things. And I'll see people in Slack being like, yo, Stephanie just came up with this like fire, like prospecting email that's like based on the concepts that we've been working on, but like taking it to the next level. So like that kind of stuff is like, I think the best part about this. So if you have a small team, you don't have ops, you don't have enablement, I would argue that you should think a lot and like track. And I've had to do this. Like as a sales director, I've realized that I was like spending a ton of my time on things that either like served other departments or things that served the company internally, but didn't really serve our customers and certainly didn't serve our salespeople. So I think like coaching as a priority is like one of the most important things that a manager can do, right? And I think of it this way, it's like, what's the one thing that if you could change would make all your other problems either like irrelevant or obsolete? And usually, like if you really think about that, like reps that like higher skilled salespeople is commonly the answer to that. So like if you think about like, hey, how am I going to prioritize my work through the lens of that question? Then I would it's got to be the manager, and then it's got to be the team from there, and you just have to decide to make it a priority.
Yeah.
My recommendation is similar to what Kyle's saying, but maybe a bit more tactical, is create a task force. But the owner of the task force is the person who's managing the reps that you're trying to improve overall. So that there's a definitive owner, and they can schedule the meetings and they can be in charge of the cadence of whatever's going on and making sure that it's being adopted. But of course, they'll need help from other people. And I would say try to get someone from each department and make it a cross-functional thing. And then I'm sure as you get impact over a short period of time, you'll justify either investing in someone to take that over part-time or even investing in it full-time.
Yeah, makes sense. And Matt, who are you getting in that task force?
Great question. So I would start with outside of sales, I'm thinking there's a marketing person, somebody to help with messaging and content, maybe product marketing. If you don't have that, then someone who's just interested in writing great content, that could be very helpful. You know, whether it's in sales or operations, someone in ops to help out, to understand how to be tracking things, how to be measuring things, et cetera, reporting. And mind you, reporting doesn't need to be fancy in any system. It can be in Google Sheets, it can be on a calculator, you know, it can be very easy to do to get started. I would definitely involve someone, maybe someone who's more senior of a sales rep, and then someone who's more junior of a sales rep, someone who's welcome to taking that feedback. Maybe you only have 2 reps, and so that's the whole task force. But I think that's a good place to start. And then depending on your business model, you know, what types of teams you use and go to market, you might have another team that makes more sense. Bring someone from product, bring someone from customer success or account management, some other function, whatever makes sense for you. But I would start with those.
Yeah, great advice. And I love this idea of the task force. I'll ask one more follow-up question to that, because sometimes it can be difficult. How do you go about selling that internally? Like, you know, kind of to Kyle's point earlier, you know, managers and these people have a lot on their plate already. How do you go about kind of selling them on this idea of getting involved and creating this culture?
It's a good question. And I know that John just asked a similar question, which is in smaller companies, it might be dangerous because you would be extending your sales cycle by taking people off the floor, et cetera. So you got to get really clear on what your expectations are. What are you testing? Are there things you can test that maybe don't require as much effort? I think that, it depends on your organization. It depends on how big you're scaling, et cetera. It also depends on your sale and what you're trying to improve. I'm sure, Kyle, from your like previous experience to the experience you have now with like different ways of selling a product, I'm sure you have like a different opinion or a similar opinion, but a viewpoint.
Yeah, I kind of thought about that as like a product roadmap almost, where it's like, I think the analogy is there where it's like, everybody always wants product to do 100 things, and like they have to go through a process of figuring out like, and actually a lot of like the stuff you've seen here today is based off of like, there's some like agile concepts in there,
Right.
And it's like, they have a million people asking for stuff. So like at some point you just have to, like be like, look, here's everything everybody's asking of sales management and leadership. Right. And like, here are the things that I see as like the 3 most important things for us to do. And while I'm not saying I'm not going to do these things, I think those are good ideas, but I'm saying like, I can't do all these things at once or none of them will be done well. One of the best operational, directors and presidents I ever had to say, it's like, I don't care who you are, how smart you are, you can only really do 3 things, and so like decide what your 3 things are, be very rigorous. And then when someone asks you for something, you're like, dude, we can totally do that. I would love to do that. You just need to tell me which of my current 3 things that you would like me to deprioritize to do that now. And these are my 3 things. Like, or if you don't think that's more important, then I can do it as soon as I'm done with the next one, which will be on this date,
Yeah. I love that. That's such a good way to frame it when these things pop up. It's like, okay, yes, let's do it. And what is getting knocked off my
right.
my to-do list? Because you're, just one man with the voice, as you said. But
one guy talking.
Just one guy talking. There it is. Cool. All right. Well, that takes us to our time. There's more questions. So, like we said, on part 1, I wish we could do part 3, part 4, part 5, part 6. But we hope to have Matt and Kyle both back on. You guys are definitely, pushing the agenda and innovation for this kind of enablement space. So it's great to be able to pick your brains, and I know the community's loving it. So thank you both for the insight, and everyone who joined us today. Thank you very much, and follow these guys on LinkedIn for sure, and we'll keep the conversation going.